There is a legend about the scariest hospital known as the Hospital of the Dead. It is located deep in the mountains, far from civilization. Its name has become part of the local mythology, and it is told only in whispers, so as not to awaken the darkness hidden behind its walls. According to legend, this hospital was built in the 19th century, and was intended for the treatment of people suffering from incomprehensible and incurable diseases. No one knew exactly what was going on there, but it was believed that sinister experiments were carried out on patients. One day a young journalist decided to investigate this legend and find out the truth about the Hospital of the Dead. He set off, collecting all possible information about the place and its history. His journey took him through dense forests and abandoned villages, and eventually he reached the place where the hospital was supposed to be. Stepping inside, the journalist found that the hospital looked like a forgotten place, immersed in darkness and silence. The walls were covered with cracks, the windows were broken, and the floors were covered with a layer of dirt. Everything breathed mystery and danger. As the journalist moved deeper into the hospital, he began to hear rustles and ghostly footsteps penetrating through the silence. The dark corridors turned into a maze, and every step brought him closer to the source of evil. As the journalist plunged deeper into the interior of the hospital, he noticed traces of blood on the walls and floor. Tension and anxiety gripped him, but his determination to continue the investigation did not run out. He decided to go further, penetrating into the intricate corridors. Each step became more and more airy, and the atmosphere around became more and more saturated with sinister energies. Suddenly, he heard muffled moans and unintelligible whispers coming from the rooms on both sides of the corridor. The journalist looked around nervously, but saw no one. However, the sounds grew louder and ghostly figures began to flash before his eyes. It seemed that he was not alone in this gloomy place, and his presence was not liked by the invisible inhabitants. The journalist's heart was pounding wildly, and his breathing was getting heavier. He realized that his investigation had led him to a place where secrets and horrors were hiding, which he was not ready to cope with. But his determination and curiosity forced him to go further. Every step forward turned into a test of his courage. Suddenly, he heard a tearful crying and the sound of a prolonged creaking. He looked up and saw the door, ajar just enough for light to come through. He walked slowly over to it and looked inside. A gloomy landscape of a room filled with fragments of the past spread out before him. On the floor were old catalogs of medical records and cracked vials of unknown drugs. The tables and beds were disfigured and peeling, as if they had been used for inhuman experiments. However, in the back of the room, the journalist noticed something strange and creepy. There, against the wall, was a small bed in which a stuffed child was lying. It was dressed in shabby pajamas, and its eyes were frozen in eternal fear. The journalist felt that his consciousness was beginning to sink into the darkness of madness. Suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut with a bang, plunging him into complete darkness. The journalist felt the breath on his neck and the ghostly hands that enveloped his body. He tried to pull away, but invisible forces held him in their arms. Suddenly, a shrill scream rang out from the darkness, followed by an egregious silence. The journalist felt his strength leaving him, and his consciousness clouded. He knew that the hospital had engulfed him and that he would become another victim of this cursed place. In the blink of an eye, creepy figures flashed in the darkness in front of the journalist. They enveloped him, flashing twinkling eyes and writhing around him with threatening aggression. The journalist tried to shout, but his voice died in his throat, drowned in endless darkness. Suddenly, a sharp alarm sounded from the depths of the room, which pierced the entire air. The light flickered for a moment, and the journalist could see the shadow of a great evil appearing in front of him. It was a creature dressed in torn clothes, with a face riddled with deep scars and shining eyes full of madness. The creature was slowly approaching the journalist, step by step, emitting an unpleasant smell of rotting and decomposition. His face was distorted into a twisted smile, revealing teeth covered with dark mold. Black liquid oozed from his fingers, falling to the floor with dull splashes. The journalist felt fear sinking into his depths, squeezing his heart. He knew that he had encountered a being beyond his comprehension. The gaze of this creature penetrated through his soul, revealing secret fears and unhealthy desires. Dark shadows danced on the walls like revived ghosts, enveloping the journalist in their vile forms. The whispers of invisible voices penetrated his ears, intertwining into a terrifying chorus that only fueled his fear. The creature finally stopped in front of the journalist, its shining eyes piercing his essence. The journalist could not take his eyes off them, feeling that he was losing control of his consciousness. Suddenly, the creature began to utter words, heavily cutting them off in mid-sentence. The sounds that escaped from his throat were so distorted and painful that the journalist felt sick. He understood that there was a dark history in these words, but he could not understand them. The walls of the room began to live their own life. The pictures on them were distorted, echoing the screams of hysterical patients. The furniture moved, creaking viciously, as if it lived by its own will. During this gloomy spectacle, the journalist began to feel how his own body was subject to dark forces. A searing pain shot through his nerves as his hands began to be covered with black wounds, spreading over his skin. He was witnessing his own bodily disintegration. The creature continued to utter incomprehensible words, penetrating into the deepest subconscious of the journalist. Words had the power to change his thoughts and desires. Eerie visions and dark fantasies began to appear in his mind, which overwhelmed his consciousness. The walls of the room were now shrinking, turning into a huge, cramped cage, which was squeezing the journalist more and more. He felt the air getting heavier, his soul gripped by hopelessness. He tried to shout, but his voice was drowned out by gloomy whispers and his own weakness. It seemed to the journalist that he was losing his consciousness, plunging deeper into the abyss of madness. He saw images of his loved ones distorted and entangled in sinister shadows. The creature dominated him, penetrating into every cell of his being. The voices of the dead sounded in his ears, whispering incomprehensible predictions and warnings. Visions of the past and the future merged in a painful chorus, filling his mind. The journalist witnessed his own death, anticipating the death that hung over him. Soon, he felt his strength leaving him powerless against the dark forces that had taken over his body and mind. He became only a doll in the hands of darkness, which lost its individuality and will. Finally, he fell to the floor, his consciousness disappearing into the bottomless blackness. The journalist has become just another body in the hospital of the dead, which has lost its human existence. No one found out the truth about his disappearance, and his name was erased from people's memory.